Dr. Sage here. Alright, are you ready to have some fun? Nah, I'm not going to make that joke. But we are going to talk about fungi today. This is the first in a series of lectures discussing fungi. In this first lecture, we're going to talk about the characteristics of fungi. First thing to know about fungi is they are eukaryotes, not prokaryotes. They're eukaryotes, like animals or plants. Second thing to know about fungi is that they're heterotrophs, and they obtain the nutrition by absorbing it into their bodies. So they secrete exoenzymes that break down complex molecules into smaller molecules and then absorb the resultant nutrient molecules. Most are spirophytes, which means they live on dead or decaying organic matter, but some are parasites. They have a cell wall which contains chitin, which is a macromolecule that's a carbohydrate, and it's similar to what you find in the exoskeleton of insects. It's a nitrogen-containing polysaccharide, and it prevents lysis of the cells if they're placed in a hypotonic environment. It stores sugars as glycogen, like in animals, not as starch, like in plants. They can be unicellular, one individual is only one cell big, or multicellular, made up of multiple cells. Unicellular would be like yeast cells. Multicellular forms network of filaments. It lacks true tissues and organs, and is predominantly haploid or haplonic. What that means is they only have one of each type of chromosome. So, a fun guy fact? Okay, I had to make the dad joke. The biggest organism on Earth is a fungus. You might think it's a whale, it's not. The honey mushroom in Oregon, which has been growing for at least 2,000 years, weighs at least 7,500 tons and covers over 3 square miles. That's one individual organism. That makes it much bigger than the blue whale. Plants, animals, and fungi trace their ancestry to Protists. Molecular data tells that animals and fungi share a common ancestor after plants evolved. In other words, one common misunderstanding is people think that plants and fungi are more closely related to each other than animals and fungi, but that's not true. Animals and fungi are more closely related to each other than either are to plants. A flagellated unicellular protist was most likely the common ancestor. Okay, so the structure of fungi is they have a body called the thallus. Of most fungi is a multicellular mycelium, whereas yeasts are unicellular. The body consists of a vast network of thread-like hyphae. Septate fungi have hyphae with cross walls. Non-septate fungi are multinucleated. Hyphae grow from the tip. This gives the mycelium a very large surface area per unit volume, which is important because they absorb their nutrients into their entire mycelium, into their entire body, their surface area. Alright, so let me explain that a little bit better in a figure. So when you think of fungi, what you most often think about is like mushrooms. Okay. Mushroom is part of the fungi. It's the fruiting body. It contains a reproductive structure that produces tiny spores. However, the majority of the fungi you oftentimes don't see. It's usually growing underneath the earth. That's where you find the subterranean mycelium, which is a continuous network of hyphae. Okay, that has a very large surface area, which is adapted for absorption of nutrients. Another fun fact about fungi is you might have heard of or seen fairy rings, okay, where it seems like mushrooms are forming in a circle. Okay, there's a reason for that. The reason for that is because the fruiting bodies, which are the mushrooms, form a ring in the middle, known as a fairy ring. The reason that it forms this ring is because the body of the fungus is actually underneath the earth, and it's filling this entire area within this fairy ring. Okay, and it's spreading out in all directions. Okay, and then whenever it's time to form the fruiting bodies, it forms at the periphery, which is why you get this ring structure here. Okay, so the fungal hyphae, the mycelium, may be either septated, okay, which means they're divided, like this here, or coentonotic, with many nuclei present in a single hyphae. Okay, so technically this would be like one cell with multiple nuclei inside it because there's no division between those nuclei. Clastoria are specialized hyphae used to penetrate the tissues of the host and extract or exchange nutrients. For example, you have parasitic fungi that extract nutrients from nematodes, which are little tiny round worms, or mutualistic fungi called mycorrhizae They exchange nutrients with plant roots, and we'll talk more about them. What happens is the fungi, shown in blue in this figure, and the plant, shown in this kind of beige and red in this figure, the fungi can penetrate into the plant cell walls. Okay, now technically it doesn't penetrate the plasma membrane. Okay, so endomycorrhizae, or avascular mycorrhizae, penetrate the cell wall but not the plasma membrane, whereas ectomycorrhizae do not penetrate the cell wall. It passes between the cell walls. Okay. So fungi oftentimes form very mutualistic relationships with plants, and we'll learn about that in later lectures. Another type of fungi is the unicellular fungi, like yeast, for example. So this organism has very similar morphology to coccus bacteria, so the little spherical bacteria. Okay, well, this is a spherical eukaryotic cell. One cell is one organism, that's one yeast cell. But remember, it's a eukaryote, unlike a bacteria is a prokaryote, so you can see that it has a nucleus inside it. Now, fungi can reproduce both sexually and asexually. Sexual reproduction involves 3 stages: haploid hyphy, dikaryotic or heterokaryotic stage, and diploid zygote. So let me walk you through that. But first, fungi can both have asexual stages and sexual life stages. Okay, so the asexual stages. Okay, production of haploid, one of each type of chromosome, spores by filamentous fungi. Sporangiospores contained in a reproductive sac called the sporangium. Conidospores found exposed on the tips of hyphae called conidia, and usually involves the production of windblown spores. Okay, so you can have asexual reproduction through forming spores, and the spores become new individuals. Or asexual reproduction by budding. That often happens with a unicellular yeast, where one yeast is going to bud off into a second yeast cell, okay, without sexual reproduction. Or regeneration, which is typical of mycorrhizae. Now, in contrast, during sexual reproduction, hyphae from 2 different mating types will fuse together. Hyphae that contain paired haploid nuclei are said to be dikaryotic. Nuclei fusion produces diploid nucleus, which produces haploid windblown spores by meiosis. Spores germinate directly into haploid hyphae without embryological development. Okay, so again, more detail in figure form. For sexual reproduction of fungi, you have plasmogamy. That's the fusion of cytoplasm of 2 different mating types. Okay, so technically it's not like 2 different sexes like you used to think about, like male or female. It's just 2 different mating types. Okay, so the cytoplasm of 2 mating types of 2 cells are going to fuse together. That then forms the heterokaryotic stage, called a dikaryon, that has 2 nuclei, but each of those nuclei is haploid, one of each type of chromosome. Then you have karyogamy, which is the fusion of the nuclei, yielding a zygote, and formation of haploid spores, and then the spores germinate or grow up, think of it like that way, into the mycelium, so like the next generation. So this is sexual reproduction because 2 different individuals of 2 different mating types are fusing together and combining their nuclei. Okay, so how are fungi useful to us? Well, we ingest them, okay? You've probably eaten mushrooms before and other forms of fungi. We use them to make food products for us. They're used in the making of cheese, they're used in the making of alcoholic beverages, and they're used in the making of bread. We also use fungi because antibiotics produced by fungi can treat bacterial infections in humans. For example, penicillin is an antibiotic that you can take and it can fight off bacterial infections. Penicillin came from a fungus. Okay, that's a brief introduction to the characteristics of fungi. In the next video lecture, we're going to talk about the many different types of fungi. So until then, this has been Dr. Sage.